Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to welcome you all to our conversation on the role of the Federal Reserve, hosted by Sunrise Banks. My name is Brent Winch. I am the Director of Credit Loss Mitigation, and I'm also a member of our Citizen Sunrise Committee here at Sunrise Banks. Citizen Sunrise is an employee-led committee focused on cultivating a culture of responsible and respectful civil engagement and encouraging all employees at Sunrise Banks to participate in voting, election, and civic opportunities. We are excited to be joined today by our Sunrise Banks employees, customers, and community members. Before we introduce our guests, we have a couple of housekeeping notes. If you have a question for Erick, please either click on the vote or on the raise your hand icon and put it in the Q&A section of the Teams event. We will also get to as many of the questions as we can during our program today. We will send out a recording and slides from this program later. So yeah, we'll get started. Today, we are excited to be joined by Erick Garcia Luna. Erick is an economist and the Director of Regional Outreach for the Minneapolis Federal Reserve. He is also a co-author of the Beige Book, which is a summary of economic activity from the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis, focusing on economic conditions in its district, which includes Minnesota, Montana, North Dakota, South Dakota, and parts of Wisconsin and Michigan. It is released approximately every 6 weeks and summarizes our commentary from businesses and community groups on current economic conditions. So with that, I'll turn it over to Erick now to kick off our conversation.
Thank you, Brent. I appreciate it. And thanks to Sunrise Bank for putting this together and making it accessible to the community and the people that you serve. That's also very important for the Fed, for us to be able to tell people what it is that we do, right? There's a lot of perhaps some mystery around what the Fed does. So my hope is that you will walk out of here knowing a little bit more about the Fed. Those of you that may not know a whole lot, and a little bit, I'm going to go over some of what's going on right now in the economy, inflation, and the labor market. With that, I'm going to share my screen now, and can you just let me know if you can see it, Brent, maybe?
Yeah, we got it.
Excellent. We're good. Great. Before I get started, I am always required to let you know that everything I say here today is a reflection of my opinions and not necessarily the views of the Federal Reserve System or the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis. So with that said, I will, start with my presentation. And again, I'm hoping that after when we are done with the presentation, that you will know a little bit more about the Federal Reserve, that you know whether the economy, currently is growing or not. Where are we on that infamous inflation that we have been experiencing over the last few years? And where's the labor market heading? That's been on the news in recent weeks. And obviously open it up for questions at the end. The Federal Reserve System is, the nation's central bank, just like other countries have the central bank of, you name it, right? We have the Federal Reserve in the United States. And the composition of the Fed it's very unique. It's very decentralized if you think about it. That seems a little bit contradictory with the fact that it's our central bank, but it is a decentralized structure. And the hope when they created the Federal Reserve was that any policy, monetary policy, when it was being carried on, that it was not just informed in Washington, D.C., right? That it wasn't just decisions being made by a few people in Washington, D.C., but rather informed by people all over the country. So they broke the Federal Reserve into 12 Federal Reserve banks and the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve, which is based in D.C. The ninth district of the Federal Reserve, the one that you see in orange, the geography might look a little bit different, but familiar, right? You have the states of Minnesota, Montana, North Dakota, South Dakota, 26 counties in northwestern Wisconsin, or northern Wisconsin, I guess that would be, and the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. And that is the 9th district of the Federal Reserve that is represented by the Minneapolis Fed. Our building is right on Hennepin Avenue. If you ever feel like touring the Fed, you can actually go on our website, and you can actually do that to request a tour. So there are about 9.7 million people that live in this district. But while relative to other districts is small in population, the geography is quite large. So we are actually covering this area constantly, talking to businesses, giving speeches, trying to tell people what the Fed is up to, but also hearing from individuals. Brent referred to the Beige Book. That's how we get to inform that work, right? By hearing from hearing from people from all over this area, businesses, workers, and community members that want to share their experience of the economy. There's a lot of data that we look at, but in order for us to better understand the economy, it is important for us to get that. As a matter of fact, I'm actually talking to you right now from Grand Forks, because I was meeting with some businesses yesterday, and also had a speech to deliver very similar to what you're getting today. So we're traveling all the time. We're hearing from people all the time. I forgot to say we have a branch in Helena that employs about 60 people. And again, there's about 1,800 miles of territory. The Board of Governors is nominated by the President. The individuals that make up the Board of Governors are nominated by the President, confirmed by the Senate for periods of about 14 years. Chair Jerome Powell will be ending his term as chair in May of next year, and then another chair will be named at that point. Here in Minneapolis, our Board of Governors appoints the president, so it's a very local group of entrepreneurs, community leaders that decide who is going to lead the Minneapolis Fed. That's also in line with that decentralized component of the Fed. So the president, in this case, Neil Kashkari, our president, was appointed about 10 years ago by the Board of Governors of the Minneapolis Fed. The Federal Open Market Committee, you hear about this body every time you're going to get a decision on where monetary policy, aka the interest rate, is going to move. You hear that the Federal Open Market Committee is going to make a decision on where monetary policy will head. And what does that mean? You have 8 permanent members of the Federal Open Market Committee. That is the 7 governors of the Federal Reserve. The New York Fed president gets a permanent seat, and then you have 4 rotating Fed presidents from all other 11 banks. I believe Neil, our president, will actually be a voting member next year, if I'm not mistaken. But so they get together, all 19 of them. Regardless, they get to participate in the discussion. So anything that's happening here in the region is being brought by Neil to the table. With the help of my colleagues and I, we try to put new information in front of him, besides the Beige Book, and we try to make sure that he's ready to bring in that local intelligence that informs the work of the Fed. So there are 2 main goals that the Federal Reserve will always pursue, right? These were 2 goals given to the Fed by Congress. It is also known as the dual mandate. You will hear probably about the dual mandate also in the news. And that dual mandate tells the Fed that as we do our work, as the Fed does its work, should be keeping an eye on 2 things: price stability, in other words, that inflation doesn't get out of hand, and maximum employment, that everyone that is able and willing and wanting to be employed is able to find that job that they want. Again, a low and stable inflation. The Fed has set a target of 2%. That's where economists believe that the economy will be growing at a stable pace, in which inflation doesn't get in which the economy doesn't overheat and also doesn't go the opposite way. So that's what economists have said for the target rate. There is no target for employment. All right, that number moves around because the population grows, the labor force participation changes. We'll get into a little bit of that in the next few slides. But there's no magic number for maximum employment. We know, for example, right now that 4.3%, 4.4% on the unemployment readings that we have seen, are working fairly well for the economy so far, although there may seem to be some weakening of the labor market in recent weeks. And so with that, we believe that the Fed works for people by maintaining, those when the Fed keeps an eye on those two priorities given to the Fed by Congress, you're obviously working for people because people that want to be employed are able to find a job, and also you don't go to the grocery store and break the bank if you have to buy your daily groceries. The Fed also processes payments. We won't get into much of that, and ensures that that the financial system is in safe and sound by supervising banks, making sure that that there are no that they keep an eye on any fragile events that may be showing up when monitoring banks. Obviously, the cash you use is actually the Fed makes sure that the quality of that dollar that you carry in your pocket is of good quality. Those that are ripped or drawn on, if they make it back to the Fed, they have to be shredded. Counterfeit money gets actually sent to the Secret Service for them to investigate what's going on with that. And obviously, interest rates affect every one of us. So that's what the Fed, is in a few slides. And I'm going to come back and say this, we depend on you. So please, if you are so willing, take some time to to complete a 2-question survey that basically will tell us that you want to be part of those people informing our work, right? How do you actually experience the economy? Helps us better understand how the economy is actually working. Again, our resources, our surveys, roundtables like the one I just had, conversations with contacts that we make have made over the years, and obviously all of that institutional knowledge that's out there. But I will encourage you to become a source, and I will use this time to also invite you to our conversations with the Fed, October 1st from 2 to 3 p.m. We will be having a discussion on the Beige Book. Come here, come and hear more about how that is prepared and what it contains. And now we'll move on quick to economic activity. I started with, is the economy growing? Well, the economy has been growing, and despite the decline experienced over the pandemic, the recovery of that, the recovery of the economy in 2021 was magnificent, I would say, just judging by that. About 6% in 2021. That was the growth as measured by real GDP, real gross domestic product, which is, you can think about it as the total of the services and products produced by the U.S. economy. And so, 2.8% in 2024 was a very good, relatively good growth rate. That 2.8%, as you can see in this map, kind of happened along the coasts of the United States, and more towards the south of the country. That is not an unusual picture to see. There's a lot of activity flowing in those areas. 1.1% for Minnesota. And this is what the recovery after the pandemic looks for Minnesota: 1.1% in 2024, 2.8% for the U.S., growing a little slower, but yet it is a very healthy number, right? Again, you can see here that after 2020, after the decline in 2020, the recovery was also sizable in Minnesota, and it continued to grow, although it has, moderated some. And on that note, the latest numbers for 2025 are those of the first 3 months of the year, Q1 2025, show that both the United States and Minnesota declined in terms of economic activity, and the United States declining more in total than the state. And I always like to show this particular chart because think about this quarterly data. It goes back to 2024, January of 2020, or I'm sorry, first quarter of 2024 through the first quarter of 2025. This one goes a little farther, just to kind of show you what the pandemic looked like, but it is the same data. It is just broken into those elements that are moving the gross domestic product. In this case, that red line that you see in the chart is the equivalent of those blue bars that we saw in the previous chart, right? Just for to make it easier to distinguish the colors on the bars. But anyway, you can see that 2.8%, that decline, I'm sorry, that decline of GDP in the United States of, sorry about that, I'm having some issues clicking here, of minus 0.5% in the United States. Is showing here in orange. You had net exports actually pulling down economic growth for the United States. Nevertheless, consumption activity remains somewhat, remain positive. Let's just say that. So the consumer continues to be resilient throughout the current economy, and inventories and non-tangible assets, those investments made by made by firms are actually contributing positively. Net exports declined because imports increased at the beginning of the year. The anecdotes that we collected from some of the people in the district is that, when firms were hearing about tariffs, were somewhat front loading a lot of their purchases, hoping to avoid, the eventual increase in prices because of tariffs. So you see that decline, but then it has kind of compensated in Q2 of 2025 as well. So the economy is back to growing at a moderate pace. In terms of industries, we're seeing that, real estate has contributed positively to GDP as of the last quarter, but you see some overall declines across different, across a broad range of industries in the first quarter. I will point out retail trade, wholesale trade as some of the ones that perhaps is worth keeping an eye on. But manufacturing remains just somewhat balanced, right? It's not positive, not negative in Q1, although, there may be some slowing in that industry as well. The picture in Minnesota looks very similar, right? You have a range of industries kind of pulling economic growth negatively. Construction here continues to be positive, manufacturing as well. And now I'll move on to what is happening in inflation, right? Over the last few years, inflation has been very high. There's no denying that we each have probably experienced paying more for what we purchase. What you have in front of you is the Consumer Price Index. That's the inflation measurement that you probably hear about the most. The Consumer Price Index is published by the Bureau of Economic Analysis, and at the peak in June in mid-2022, it reached a level of 9.1%. And so, since then, as you all probably are aware, the Fed decided to tighten monetary policy, making sure that if you can think about it as the economy was overheating. I said that earlier, right? The economy was accelerating, and that was pushing prices up. So the way to address that is to make sure that is to act in a way that reduces the level of resources out there by raising the interest rate. So raising the interest rate will cause the economy to slow down, but at the same time, it will bring those prices, those price accelerations, I guess, down. And so 9.1, the core inflation, which ignores the prices of food and energy, just because those prices are extremely volatile. I mean, just think about, you probably paid a price for gas today, you might pay a different price tomorrow, right? Just a basic example. If you go to the grocery store today, you might pay a different price for groceries, either cheaper or more expensive, or cheaper in the next week or so. But anyway, that's why economists like to look at the core inflation reading, just because it eliminates that noise, and it gives economists a better sense of where inflation might be heading. The Fed looks at the personal consumption expenditures index, very similar than the CPI. Same concept, you have core and headline readings. That runs a little lower than CPI, 7.2% at the very top in mid-2022, is back down to 2.6%. But I mentioned earlier that the Fed has an objective of ensuring that inflation reaches 2%, right? And so that's still 0.6 above the target rate. Now, you might be wondering, well, what is pushing inflation, in which direction, right? So think about this red line and move on to this chart and just pretend you're coloring, the different elements that contribute to inflation, and whether they're pulling it up or down. It's evident here that for the most part, services inflation is always contributing the most to inflation, right? No surprise, we're a services economy, right? And so services contributes to inflation the most overall. But what's curious here, in my opinion, is that during the years following the pandemic, when inflation started going up, you saw an increase in the contributions from goods inflation, right? Adding to the reading. And if you look at the years prior to 2021, those yellow bars were actually contributing negatively, right? And that's not unusual. Goods inflation, firms get better at producing the things they sell, and so things get cheaper over time, and that will contribute to prices being pulled down a little bit. And so then food and energy contributing also positively, overwhelmingly. Currently, where inflation is it continues to, services inflation, it continues to be contributing, out of the normal. I don't like to use that word, but I guess just for the purposes of illustrating it, it's still elevated, and a lot of the services inflation, a lot of the inflation that we're seeing today is concentrated in that area. I will also note that in 2025, goods inflation is back to contributing positively to that inflation reading. I'll try to jump through these for, I think I have is there 5 more minutes left? Okay, we're good. I thought I was running out of time for some reason. But so the labor market, what is happening there? Labor force participation. The labor force participation is the measurement of all those individuals that are over the age of 16, who are either working or looking for employment, right? And so all of those people that are available for employment, again, or are employed, it's 68.1% of the 16-year-old population for Minnesota and 62.3% for the United States. The good thing here is Minnesota's labor force participation is higher than that of the country on average, right? And perhaps the not so good thing is that you can see that the decline of that labor force participation appears to be more pronounced for Minnesota, and there are a lot of elements that go into this labor force participation changes. One of them could be the aging of the current population, lower birth rates, and less migration, both internal and international. That could be changing the composition of the labor force in Minnesota, and therefore reducing the available people that are there for our state's labor force. I mentioned earlier the unemployment rate. The unemployment rate at 4.3% for the United States has ticked up a little bit. It was super low in the years following the pandemic, 2022, 2023, and it started to just kind of linger around that 4.2, 4.3% range. And Minnesota's unemployment rate, this is also good news, 3.5%, runs lower than the unemployment rate in the country as a whole. Now, you've probably been hearing a lot about employment. You've probably been hearing a lot about the employment numbers and revisions, et cetera, et cetera. So what does that picture look like? You have the year-over-year change. That's a 12-month change of jobs in the economy, right? So you have there's not much more to take away from here than the employment declined heavily in the years following the pandemic. You might have heard that employers were struggling to secure the workers that they needed, right? And so hiring wasn't as rapid as the decline was, right? When the pandemic hit, there was a huge decline on unemployment, but the recovery of those jobs was not as quick. You can actually almost try to flip that downward pattern and try to put it on the other side, and it's not going to be nearly the same in that same period of time. So the employment has recovered from those from that pandemic decline. It was strong over 2022, 2023, but it has since kind of started to decline, right? And that means less firms are hiring people, right? And if they are, they're losing workers by attrition, they're not immediately perhaps hiring those individuals. Same data, just a different look at it, just to kind of show you the more immediate, I guess, decline in the tail end of that chart towards August of 2025. This is the 3-month average of that same data, the change in employment, and it shows a little bit of a decline in the latest readings. Particularly, we heard that there were about 22,000, I believe, 20,000, 22,000 jobs added in the last month. This is what they look like, right? Those jobs were mostly added in the healthcare industry, some in arts and entertainment. Food services remain, strong. Again, this is U.S. data. We'll see the Minnesota data in just a little bit. Retail trade, manufacturing and construction. I point out those because when you think about big projects, when you think of things that the economy is producing, goods that the economy is producing, I always think about construction and manufacturing as being indicators of where the economy might be heading as well. This is the same U.S. data, but I just wanted to show you even though in recent months, employment has been declining over the year ending in August, it remains largely positive across most of the industries, except for manufacturing and information. The Minnesota picture again, looks very similar to that of the country, and the recovery was actually slower in Minnesota. Employment did not recover pre-pandemic levels until, I think it was early 2024. And I might be wrong on that, but it was very recent that it happened. And so you can think about it as in the state, we struggled a little more to hire those workers that we needed. And there's a good reason for that that I'll show you in a little bit. So the year-over-year growth ending in July, which is when the latest data is available for the states. Healthcare also drove a lot of that employment growth. Government and construction continue to contribute positively. I'm sorry, to the employment of the state as well as manufacturing, which in my opinion is it's a good thing. In terms of the current state of employment, I will categorize it as also somewhat softening, right? The employment is not employment growth is not as strong as it was a couple of years ago. Job openings have declined. That means people are not as eager to perhaps hire. And the quits levels, that light blue line that you see on your screen, during the years following the pandemic, 2021, 2022, you probably read articles or heard in the news people talking about the Great Resignation, right? And the Great Resignation was a way of characterizing the fact that people were leaving their jobs to take other jobs that perhaps paid better. Now that's not happening as much, right? So that line has kind of started to slope down a little bit. The good news here is that those layoffs and discharges, that line, that yellow line, is not, is not ramping up, and that could be perhaps a little bit concerning. Economists have characterized this current labor market in which you have slow employment growth, but not necessarily strong layoffs, as this kind of wait and see, this low hiring, low firing environment. That's where we're at this point. I mentioned earlier, that the Minnesota has maybe Minnesota employers struggled in general more than the country as a whole to hire workers, and that the recovery wasn't as quick. And these next two charts that I'm about to show you are very telling of that. You can think this is the ratio of those job openings that I just pointed at, and the number of unemployed persons in the economy of the United States. And you can think about this as mid-2022, there was about half a person per job opening, right? And now you have, or 2 jobs per person, per available person. And now you have, close to parity, right? 1-to-1. You have 1 job to 1 person available per job opening. In Minnesota, that was tighter and continues to be tighter, right? You have about 4 jobs per person, about a quarter of a person per job, and you have close to a little bit more than half a person per job, or less than 2 jobs per person, but it's still pretty tight. So, and with that, I will end my presentation. Hopefully that was on time. I can't see I'm sorry, but I can't see the timing here, and I just want to make sure that that I stay on track and that I answer any questions that you might have. Thank you so much.
That's all right. Thank you, Eric. Now we are going to move into our Q&A section. I wanted to move into a little sooner, but I didn't want to stop Eric because he was doing such a great job and giving us such great information. So I wanted to keep it going.
Thank you.
But so yeah, now we'll move into our Q&A section. I would like to introduce my coworker Amanda Tyson from Sunrise Banks, who will moderate the Q&A.
All right, thanks everyone. Thank you for joining us. We've got about 10 minutes or so for Q&A. So again, if you do have a question for Erick, you can just pop it into the Q&A section here. You could also raise your hand if you feel brave enough to speak your question, but we do have some that we'd like to get started on, Erick. Nathan has a couple of questions. Do you have a sense of what is driving the downward trend for finance and insurance? And then do you have any detail on what types or categories of services drive inflation the most?
I do not necessarily have an answer for the first part of it. There are a lot of elements that go into the finance industry that may be pulling the industry down, but I will not dare to guess what may be happening in the state. In terms of services inflation, we know that it is housing services inflation that is pushing that, or that is maintaining that high contribution to inflation. So, some of my smarter colleagues at the Fed have been looking at, what that could potentially look like in the future, and some are confident that the services inflation will moderate in the next few months, but that is basically what is driving that inflation reading the most.
Okay, great. Our next question is from Bishop. Since the dollar's strength relies on faith and trust rooted in the Federal Reserve's independence, how does the Fed demonstrate that it remains the most independent central bank in the world?
Yeah, that is a loaded question, and I'm glad it was asked in a way, because the Fed takes independence very seriously, and so you can take, for example, the latest, for those familiar with the Fed, and for those that are not, is perhaps a good time to point out the summary of economic projections that the Federal Reserve Board publishes right after the Federal Open Market Committee. If people look at those, they can see the widespread or the different ways in which those participants, the 19 participants of the Federal Open Market Committee that I mentioned earlier, think the economy, where they think the economy is going in terms of GDP, employment, inflation, the same measurements that I presented on today. They also vote or put their thoughts on where the policy rate might go next, and they also what they do is they vote, if you want to, they put a dot, that's called the dot plot. Some of those, some of you are familiar with that. So the dot plot, each of the FOMC participants will put a dot where they think that rate is going to go, let's say, at the end of 2025, 2026, 2027, and in the long run. Why do I bring that up? Because that's when I think about Fed independence, I look at that, and I look at the different opinions that the different members of the FOMC have. To me, even in the latest meeting, where there were so many questions around this particular piece of Fed independence, it shows that people are there just giving their opinion based on what they know about the economy, and I think that that's important. And I think my boss Neil Kashkari will answer the question somewhere along the lines of the Fed is going to continue to do its job based on the data that's available, and that's perhaps one of the best ways in which it can maintain that independence.
Great, thank you. We have about 5 minutes left in our program. Our next question is from Masudi. Apologies if I said the name incorrectly, but it is surprising to see that the government category has added jobs. When do you think the impact of the federal worker layoffs will be reflected in the data?
Yeah, so that number that you saw, particularly for Minnesota, was a year-over-year, change, and it was I haven't compared it to previous years. It will be interesting to see what it was like the year before, but it will be good to see, how much of a growth that really is compared to last year. Something for me to take note of. But so some of those federal jobs. And my understanding is that some of those workers are on furlough, right? So they cannot be counted as unemployed, right? So they're still part of that, of those employment numbers. So that could be one reason. And the other is that, while federal government employment might still be growing, might be declining, state and municipal might still be growing, right? Like again, there are so many pieces that go into these numbers that it would be hard to single one out. As far as when do I expect things to show, I never speculate, but, I'm assuming that if, for example, um, those furlough workers, that runs too long, then those will trickle down into the economy, but it's hard to tell.
Yeah, absolutely. One more question from Masude. Do you track employment by race and ethnicity? I think people of color do not fare as well as the rest of Minnesota. Is there any data that you can share on that? Whether it's unemployment or even underemployment, when it comes to people of color?
Yeah, I have not in recent months. I actually wrote a couple articles on immigrant employment, for example. The data can be a little tricky, when you start like filtering or adding filters, I guess, to your data searches in terms of like how much do you want to know about a particular population. So there are ways in which that can be done. I've looked at immigrant employment in the last couple of years. In labor force participation, for example, among immigrants is known to be higher. Employment had grown, particularly for immigrant women. Those are the things that top of mind I can point to. My colleagues in community development and engagement at the Minneapolis Fed, each bank has a community development and employment and engagement, leg to the bank. They may be doing some research, but I cannot recall or know, immediately whether there are some. I will encourage the person that submitted this question to check out our website, minneapolisfed.org, and go to the community development section. I know that we have, I would be remiss if I don't mention our Center for Indian Country Development. Our Center for Indian Country Development does track some specific statistics for the Native community, and the name is going to escape me, but some of my colleagues at the Opportunity and Inclusive Growth Institute have also been working with the census to try to get a better sense about how different demographics are faring. So I will invite you all to just check that out in our website.
Okay, we have time for one more question. This is from Corinne. She's one of our branch managers here at Sunrise Banks, and she said her team is excited to hear about what will happen with pennies next year. Are you able to explain what will happen and then how paying for items will change?
I should have been more prepared with that. I am so sorry that I did not look into that. So I'm going to defer on that, but I promise to perhaps send you some information as soon as I'm done with this, or ask some of my colleagues for that.
Okay, wonderful. Yes, and we do have a couple questions we weren't able to get to, so we will try to get those answers. We can send those to you, and then we'll try to get those answers out to our attendees so that they know that you answered them. So,
excellent.
Great. Well, I'm going to turn it back over to Brent to wrap things up for us this afternoon.
Thank you again, Amanda, and thank you so much, Eric, for joining us today.
Thank you.
And to all of you, thank you for attending our program. Again, we'll send out the recording and the slides at a later time. We hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Goodbye.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.